Well, thank you for joining us, and I know it's late in the day there, and it's early in the day here, but I'm glad it worked out. And it's nice to meet you. I don't think we've met at any conferences, and my involvement with the IGU started after yours on the commission, at least, ended. So with that, the first question we have is for you to describe your own history and involvement with the International Geographical Union, and specifically the Commission on Political Geography.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. First of all, let me say how grateful I am and how delighted I am to have this opportunity and to be a part of this wonderful conversation. Your question takes me down that wonderful memory lane, taking me back to the year 2004, when I was invited to join the steering committee of the IGU Commission on Political Geography. And I served in that privileged position from 2004 to 2012, I think. And those were very, very exciting times for me. And the first thing which made me feel very honored and very privileged was that I came from political science with very little formal training in the discipline of geography. So my gurus were critical geographers like Professor Agnew. I looked up to Professor John O'Loughlin, many others, and some of them were very much on the steering committee. I'm reminded of Professor Sanguin. I'm reminded of Professor Gosa. Professor David Newman was also there on the steering committee. And coming from political science to political geography, and was very, very fascinating, was very instructive. And that was the time when I was interested in a number of things. You know, I was interested and still am in the theories and practices of geopolitics. I had worked a few years earlier at the Scott Polar Institute at University of Cambridge on polar regions, a political geography. That was the title of the book. And I was also deeply interested in the question of borders, boundaries, and frontiers. We organized a number of conferences. I remember one conference which was again sponsored by IGU, was held in Chandigarh, which was on the geopolitics of Eurasia, looking at the question of boundaries and borders. So this is how it all started. And turned out to be a very enriching conversation and experience for me, Dr. Johnson.
Well, you bring an interesting and unique perspective to this project because of your history in political science and international relations, but doing the crossover to geography as well. And I know you're still also firmly ensconced in IR and political science. But from your perspective, what have been the most influential theoretical innovations, movements, discourses over the last 100 years in political geography?
That is a huge question because 100 years is a very long time. We are looking at one very long century, and I also find it sort of slightly challenging to answer this question because of the fact that I am mindful of the difference between political geography, P in capital, G in capital, as eventually in IR, international relations, as a discipline, and the disciplinary politics, when and where was the discipline was being established, and political geographies in small letter P and G, like small letters in I and R, international relations. And if we talk about the political geographies in plural, which means a set of practices and and so on, then I think we are looking at a very vast canvas, which includes the colonial, the colonization that we saw in different parts of the world, and the fact that over this long century, there were questions of war and peace. There were questions of partition. I remember doing a work at University of Columbia Institute of Advanced Studies with Professor Ranabir Samadar, Professor Rada Ivakovic, Stefano Bianchini on partitions, reshaping minds and states. So question of partition, boundaries, borders, as I said, decolonization, and the list can go on. It's a very long, but I think the main achievement, I think, of the discipline of political geography is pluralism. Its ability to go eclectic, its ability to talk to the times, to the spirit of the times, and the fact that over the years, say for example, if we take a look at just one example, which is the Journal of Political Geography, we would find that it has indeed responded to the challenge of the times. So looking at this very important interplay between theoretical innovation and empirical innovation, I think political geography, by and large, has kept up with the challenge of the time. The only thing is that I find, like we are discussing in international relations today, and also in geopolitics, that how do we move towards more global geopolitics? How do we move towards more global international relations? Some scholars have used the expression non-Western international relations, but I would prefer the term global, because that includes those parts of the world, particularly in global South, where we do see themes like marginality, poverty, all kinds of biases, including race, and the biases, for example, in the case of India, caste. The only thing is that, and I think this is where the gaps are while talking about, some of these great achievements of the discipline, that in many parts of the world, I'm reminded of my own country, which is India, we did not find enough engagement with the discipline of historical, or the sub-disciplines of historical geography, cultural geography, even political geography. So there were gaps, particularly in terms of case studies. So I would say some kind of an imbalance, some kind of a mismatch between the empirical and the theoretical. But then I think it is not just the sub-discipline of political geography. It applies to other sub-disciplines and disciplines as well.
So what you just said sparked many thoughts in me, but one of the questions that I think you will bring a unique perspective to, just because of where you sit, and you're in India, in the global South, and promoting what I think is a wonderful concept of global political geography, is the exchange between Western, and just using that term as shorthand, and hopefully you know what I mean, sort of Anglo-American / Western European perspectives and discourses. Has the exchange with, for example, Indian political geography been more or less one way, or how do you see that relationship? Are there contributions that you think Western scholars have ignored to their peril that come from other contexts? If you can just comment on that, I think that would be helpful.
Locations matter. They always have, they do, and they will continue to matter. And I think an important difference still remains and will remain for a long time between the map makers and the map takers, and the theory makers and the theory takers. Things change, of course, because you asked me the question about 100 years, but I would even extend it to 500 years of political geographies in small p and small g. And we find that one thing which probably worked against this much needed conversation between the Western and the non-Western uh, was the politics behind the production of geographical knowledges in this, and also this asymmetry, this imbalance in the knowledge power nexus. Having said that, I think a good deal of blame should also be taken by what we call the non-Western world. And I'm very much aware of the fact that there is a very complex history and geography to both the categories, the Western and the non-West, or what we call the global South. So one wonders as to why I'm now having in mind the larger subcontinent, post-colonial and post-partition South Asia. And I asked myself the question as to why is it that we did not have the sort of emergence of the disciplines of various subdisciplines of geography, and also the discipline of geography. Why this neglect? One answer could be that maybe there was geography, there was spatial, but it was not within the formal discipline of geography, because geography was also being seen as very much a tool of power and power politics, given the fact that we had a lot of emphasis and a lot of engagement with the post-colonial reality and the post-partition reality when it comes to the Indian subcontinent. So somehow we did not have the kind of conversation that we very much needed. And I'm reminded here of a very recent article. You remember this in Geopolitics, we published very recently, a very fine reflection of the last 25 years of the journey of the Journal of Geopolitics, to which all the editors who have served geopolitics wrote, including Professor John Agnew and Simon Dolby and David Newman. And David Newman, in his note essay, points out that we did invite myself, Professor Chaturvedi, and Vladimir Kolosov to serve on the editorial board of the journal, but somehow we could not achieve what we wanted to achieve, which is publications, research on the non-Western traditions, engaging with the question of territory, engaging with the question of space. So there is this, but as I said, that a lot of blame I would take upon scholars like me, that for all kinds of reasons, epistemic, institutional, sometimes just political, we could not develop the other side of the argument, because you need both the sides, you need multiple sides to create a conversation or a debate.
Well, as a co-editor of Geopolitics currently, we would welcome your submission on that very topic. I think it sounds fascinating and much needed. So it could be even we have something, non-peer-reviewed papers that go into forums and that sort of thing. And I can't remember exactly what they're called, but we would certainly welcome that. Be happy to facilitate that too. How would you comment on the health of the subdiscipline? I mean, some of what you said already alludes to the answer to that, but do you have any further thoughts about the health or unhealth, if you will, of the discipline?
You see, I'm reminded of a very fascinating article I wrote by John O, published in Political Geography, I think in 2018, not that long back, where the title of his contribution is 35 years of political geography. And when I was noting this down, I wrote within brackets in plural, saying that 25 years of political geographies, because he uses this distinction between PG in small and PG in capital letters. So I just said in plural. And political geography, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's a very provocative title he gave to his wonderful piece. And he said something which I've already alluded to, that the most healthy part of political geography as a discipline has been its pluralism. And he says something with which I quite agree. And I think that is one way of reflecting on your question, the health and the unhealth of the discipline, which is that he talks about the widening gap between the disciplines of political science and political geography. And I think this is a very important point he's making, but it is not just the gaps or the gulf in some cases between political science and political geography. I have also been discussing in my classrooms the discipline, the politics of the making of the discipline of international relations. And I have been saying that I think today, looking at the crisis that the discipline of international relations and the crisis that social sciences are facing, I consider myself fortunate that I came to international relations from the discipline of political science. I consider myself fortunate that I went to geopolitics, I went to geography, political geography, from the discipline of political science. Of course, with the handicap, which of course, as I said, I learned my geography from my very distinguished colleagues all over the world over the years, and also my extensive travels to different parts of the globe. But today, when I look at the state of the disciplines in social sciences, let us include the sub-discipline of political geography. I find this crisis because of the fact that a lot of the theoretical toolkit that we have, the kind of conceptual toolkit that we have at the disposal of various disciplines is struggling in a way to describe, explain, and quote unquote predict the way you can, the extent to which you can predict in social sciences, the reality on ground. I'm just not talking about reality on land, metaphorically, reality at sea, reality in spaces which are not strictly terrestrial, which are not strictly geographical. And that crisis is profound. That crisis is a serious crisis, and I think political geography is no exception. And more recently, I have been reflecting on the notion of Anthropocene education. So I want to bring in that Anthropocene, because pandemics that we are all facing right now is also a part of that question of Anthropocene, which is not just a geological epoch, it is also a social geological epoch. And we are looking at intersectionality. We are looking at a reality which no discipline today can explain. And then there is another point, which is that when we talk about political geography as a sub-discipline, we can say it has two components here. What is the mother discipline? What is the father discipline of which political geography is a sub-discipline? One could say, going by just the etymology of political geography, one could say it's political science and say geography, or the study of politics and political, which is not necessarily the exclusive prerogative of the discipline of political science, and the discipline of geography, which again has a lot of strands and a lot of sub-disciplines. Now, what happens when your father discipline or the master discipline itself runs into some kind of a crisis, and it reflects in your methodology, it reflects in your pedagogy. And I think the health or the sub-health or the non-health of the discipline in the case of political geography is also due to what I call the metamorphosis in terms of reality. Look at politics and political. Today, we are theorizing in neoliberal times. we have a very important overarching context of neoliberal globalization. And what we see in many parts of the world, both the global north and the global south, is the politics of what we call non-political, or the politics of anti-political. We see very complex and compelling geographies of populism, religious bigotry, nationalism. Emotions were always there, in politics and political, but the way in which we find the emotional turn in social sciences, in international relations, I think is having far-reaching consequences. So, Anthropocene, the challenge of the Anthropocene, this is just one example, and all that goes with it. The question of climate change, the question of unsustainability, the question of natural disasters. I think one of the key challenges before political geography as a subdiscipline is how does the geography, going from geography to politics and political, how do we ensure that when in empirical reality, we see the decline of the social, we see the loss of political, maybe in some cases replaced by techno-scientific expertise, how do we ensure that the discipline, discipline, whatever we call it, this domain of knowledge production does not get imbalanced, and how do we ensure a geography which is not just hijacked by imaginative geographies of the powers that be, but a geography which is also very sensitive to lived in geographies. And I think much will depend on the ability of our discipline, subdiscipline, political geography, to continue to return, in the face of all these challenges, to human, cultural, social, and ecological geographies. So if we go with the empirical engagement of political geography, very, very impressive. I mean, the IGU website itself lists out the journals that we have, ranging from political geography, geopolitics, the annals, the progress in human geography, antipode, and so on and so on. So I think there is no dearth, but there are larger, I think, epistemological and also ontological challenges that we are facing. But as I said, to conclude, it is not just the challenge before political geography. It is a challenge before a whole range of disciplines in social sciences.
So, in 2030 and beyond, presumably there's still going to be a subdiscipline of political geography, and there's going to be graduate students reading papers from the past, as we did when we were in graduate school. And so what of your contributions to knowledge, your papers or books or whatever, do you hope that students in graduate seminars in 10, 20 years might still find interesting, relevant, insightful?
I think that is on my part of wishful thinking. I hope. I think more recently the work, and I cannot take the credit for it all by myself, because it has been a collaborative work, collaborative research. I am basically a sort of very humble team worker, so to speak, in these research networks that we have created over the years. And let me begin with my interest in the ocean studies, the maritime studies. I have the privilege of being the editor-in-chief of a journal called Journal of the Indian Ocean Region, which is published by Routledge, which is the flagship journal of Indian Ocean Research Group, which has an observer status in IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association. And that is one of the reasons as to why I'm deeply interested in the question of maritime regionalism, which I hope young political geographers now will pay more attention in a comparative perspective. It's a very fascinating field. And I have taken over from two wonderful colleagues with whom I have worked over the years on Indian Ocean. One is Professor Dennis Rumley, who is the founding chair of IORG and the editor-in-chief of the journal, followed by Professor Timothy Doyle, with whom I have done more recently work on a critical geopolitics of climate change. The book was published by Paul Gray Macmillan, 2015, called Climate Terror, a critical geopolitics of climate change. And I feel very humbled by the fact that the book has invited a very large number of reviews in various journals of political geography and international relations. And it continues to invite a conversation, a debate, and the questioning. We use the lens of Global South. We argued in this book that climate change is a complex and compelling reality. We have to address climate change with all seriousness and sincerity at our disposal, at our command. And when I make this statement, I also want to flag, with your permission, my engagement with the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as one of the lead authors for Chapter 10 of the Working Group 2 of the 6th Assessment Report, which now is going to be available, I think, within a couple of months, by the end of February or early March. So I'm very much into climate change studies. And so from polar studies, polar regions, where I remain interested, I remain engaged, to Indian Ocean, to climate change. I hope that Polar Regions of Political Geography, the book, which scholars find interesting, will encourage the young generation of political geographers to make one case, and that is to sort of, I don't know whether it's the right word, to work in the direction of turning or revisiting, rethinking area studies and engaging them or putting them in direct conversation with mainstream disciplines. We have polar studies, for example, we have ocean studies, and new spaces are opening up. We have cyberspace, we have geostationary orbit, we have the outer space, we have a new space, very engaging, very complex, very compelling, and that is the atmosphere. So international relations are becoming multi-spatial. So the spatial dimension of politics at all levels, and we know that some very important interventions have been made by feminist geographers and feminist scholars, inviting our attention to the scale of the body, from body to the planet, the notion of planetary boundaries. We are looking at this complex challenge of multispatiality. Now, given that locations matter, given that there is a rewriting of the earth once again, given that we live in a moment of interregnum, which is characterized by transitions, transformations, at the same time, remarkable continuity and remarkable change. My hope is that, number one, that we would encourage more case studies, I think, because I think there is also a battle going on between reductionism and the need for details. Climate change is something within the larger overarching context of the Anthropocene, which the meaning of which needs to be deepened and broadened. And I hope that what we have done, what we have tried to achieve in this book called Critical Geopolitics, Climate Terror, a critical geopolitics of climate change, we have argued that it is very important to understand that climate change is not just global warming. There is a very complex geography and history to climate change. We need to bridge the gap also between the scientific understanding of climate change and the cultural climate understanding of climate change. We have to develop a subaltern perspective of climate change. We have to engage more closely with the concepts of climate justice. We have to critically interrogate the categories like climate refugees, climate migrants. We have to theorize in an interdisciplinary way or even transdisciplinary way the concepts of mobility, the concepts of connectivity, particularly when we are talking about China's Belt and Road initiative, for example. We still find that there is not enough critical theoretical engagement with the very concept of connectivity. So I hope that my modest contribution to polar regions, the contribution that we are trying to make, we, not just we, through the Indian Ocean Research Group and the Journal of Indian Ocean Region to ocean studies, maritime studies, and climate change project, our students and scholars and young generation of scholarship will find this interesting enough. But it's a brave new world, waiting to be theorized. How critical is critical geopolitics? How critical is critical international relations? What kind of critical political geography we are talking about? How do we address or how do we ensure academic, intellectual, critical interventions on the intersections? And how do we reimagine our disciplines within the larger framework of Anthropocene education? Some little modest contribution, I said, we have initiated, but I think it's a long way ahead.
That's great. Thank you. Sort of turning the tide just a little, turning the lens just a little bit in terms of papers or books from other geographers past or in the past that you still find inspirational or interesting provocations today.
Well, so there's so many of them. Going back, still, as I said, going back to the fundamentals of the basics, Jared Otto's Critical Geopolitics. Still that seminal paper on territorial trap by Professor John Agnew and several of his books. That wonderful, inspiring scholarship of Matthew Spark, including his more recent work on introducing globalization. Philip Steinberg's, given my interest in the ocean affairs and the maritime geopolitics, Philip Steinberg's seminal scholarship on constructions of the ocean. Simon Dolby's more recent Anthropocene geopolitics. I mean, there are so many, and I'm sorry, I'm not taking all these names, but I think from a critical angle, from a critical scholarship point of view, whether we're talking about geopolitics on land, geopolitics at sea, cyberspace geopolitics, outer space geopolitics, polar geopolitics, Cloud Dot's work continues to inspire me a lot. And then there are scholars who do not fall within the social science framework, but their scholarship is absolutely outstanding. And that is, for example, Dr. Alan Hemmings from New Zealand, who works on Antarctic affairs. And so much of scholarship that we have seen in these wonderful journals, geopolitics, political geography. I'm also inspired by several publications of Professor David Harvey. And more recently, given this metamorphosis that is taking place, I have been absolutely engaged. I'm fascinated by what we see now, writings on Marxian geopolitics. You see where we see this entanglement between a very interesting interplay between the category of space and what we call category of class. So I'm sure I'm forgetting several works right now. So many of them.
Well, we could have asked it, even made it more difficult by saying you have to pick one, but we let you choose a few, and that was wonderful. So I'm curious. We talked about the health of the subdiscipline, but maybe turning to your own context, and you've talked a little bit about India and where you're coming from, but just in terms of is political geography in India a waxing or waning subdiscipline? Are students becoming more interested in it given the global context in which they find themselves, or even the national context? How is the health in India of political geography?
I would say that with every passing day, I am becoming more hopeful and more confident of a very bright future for political geography and geopolitics in India. And how do I explain this wonderful development while also talking in the same breath about the fact that we do not have very many departments? Certainly there are. At Jawaharlal Nehru University, we have a very vibrant Center for the Study of Geopolitics, and Manipal University. At Punjab University, Chandigarh, we had Center for the Study of Geopolitics. And currently I am based at South Asian University, where I teach a number of papers on related to political geography, geopolitics, maritime geopolitics, Indian Ocean studies. A lot of political geography is taking place now, a good deal of political geography, also border studies. Let me mention that. We have, for example, at South Asian University, we have a very robust program. We have just published a special issue of the Journal of Borderland Studies, and which has also been published by Routledge on South Asian borders and borderlands. The only thing is, which I don't consider as a bad, as an unwelcome development, that a lot of political geography and a lot of interest in geopolitics you see in other departments. For example, in the Department of International Relations at South Asian University, a good deal of engagement with the geographical, with the spatial, in different centers at the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and also elsewhere at Jadavpur University, and a number of universities, like O.P. Jindal University, Ashoka University. And as I speak right now, I have a PhD in progress on outer space geopolitics, taking Bangladesh as a case study of the middle space power. I have a fascinating PhD project going on geopolitics of connectivity, views on and from Nepal. I have one PhD in progress right now at the school at the South Asian University on a geopolitical analysis of blue economy, focusing on the concept of blue diplomacy. I have one PhD thesis now in progress on the Indo-Pacific, the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, and I can list out a very large number of MPhil dissertations and PhD dissertations, some of which I have also examined, which is a good sign. And what is also very interesting is that students and scholars, while they engage with seminal contributions, some of which I have just listed out, just some of which I did not mention, for example, another work which is often discussed in our classrooms by Professor Derek Gregory, particularly his book, The Colonial Present, and many others. So there is the robust engagement. There is this opening up of the conversation. At the same time, there is this growing curiosity. There is this growing sense of commitment to address the issue that Professor David Newman raised in that article that I was talking about recent in geopolitics, which is where are our traditions here? in plural again. Even when you talk about India, you're looking at number of traditions. So it is not just going only to Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra, right? It is also now going to various other writings, various other works, and see what kind of contributions, given our location, these scholars can make to a more robust, more vibrant, more relevant global geopolitics and global political geography. So, as I said, I'm very happy. I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful, and I think over the years we are going to see some wonderful scholarship and work being done here.
Great, that's and I learned a lot just from that as well. I'm not being terribly familiar with the Indian context. So as we wrap up, I'm curious if you have the other reflections on the past, present, and or future of political geography that would help as we put together this project.
Firstly, I would say that it is not just good, bad, and ugly, because I think Professor John Agnew, in his one of his articles, more recent articles, where again he looks at the origins and evolution of the discipline of political geography, does talk about the need to keep ourselves focused on the empirical and the conceptual, the empirical and the theoretical. I think the past, one has to reflect, learn from the past, but also identify both the strengths and the knowledge gaps. I think that is one important task, which is that constantly going back to taking a historiographical approach, historiography of various disciplines and sub-disciplines. And I think as we do that, there would always be new insights and surprises. We would realize how disciplines discipline our imagination of the spatial and the political. So I would say that let us go back, let us keep turning to the past of the discipline and see, look at the silences, look at the knowledge gaps, also celebrate the contributions that we have made. Coming to the present, and particularly the pandemics, I think we need to pluralize Anthropocene, because we often, from time to time, we often run into the hegemonic and homogenizing concepts and categories. I think it happens. It happens for all kinds of reasons, right? Particularly the way in which knowledge power interplay and interact. So we had, for example, sustainable development. We have sustainable development goals. We have the concept of the Anthropocene, the new socio-geological epoch. Now, this is not to suggest that these concepts are not important, these categories are not important, but the need of the time is to broaden and deepen these categories, bringing in as many insights, as many geographies in the political, as many understandings of the political as possible in our, I would even call it the discipline rather than, perhaps not just sub-discipline, not even perhaps discipline, because I think there is this question of the disciplinary boundaries. But whatever we call it, whether we call it domain of new knowledge production or knowledge production, it would be very, very useful for us to look around, scan the globe, right from Arctic to Antarctica, go horizontally, go vertically, look into the spaces which are beyond the planet Earth, and see how these spaces are moving in and out of their geographical frames, and continue to thrive. Coming to the future, I think there are a number of issue areas which political geographers will continue to find very, very challenging, very useful, very relevant. And the more I look at the reality articulated through the category of Global South, which used to be called the Third World during the Cold War times, I think it is very important for us to continue to interrogate, number one, the politics of knowledge production. What qualifies as knowledge? Does experience qualify as knowledge? And this is where I think we have to look at the margins. I honestly believe that why don't we look at climate change from the margins? Why don't we look at it from below? Dipesh Chakravarti's work, very recent, fascinating work on, say, for example, the hierarchies that we have in Indian society. He says, look at the caste hierarchy, for example, and see how the downtrodden, how those who have been socially, economically marginalized, culturally marginalized, how they look at these problems and these issues. Explore, interrogate the new forms of slavery that we find emerging before us, including slavery at sea. Looking ahead, also from present and the future continuum, also look at the challenge that is being posed by the dislocations, displacements caused by neoliberal globalization. Political geography, geopolitics, and other journals have published remarkable work on refugees, on migrants, on the whole question of displacement. And I think that kind of critical scholarship will continue to remain important over a long period of time. Polar studies, I would say, is still open. This is because when we look at Antarctica today, for example, the question of the post-colonial engagement with Antarctica. When we look at the Arctic, we look at the Arctic paradox, for example, the manner in which, say, for example, the climate change is unfolding in the Arctic, and as a result, the way in which we have this imagery of changing Arctic and the new scramble for resources. And finally, I would say that let us not forget that coming to the question of pandemics, I think this is a wake-up call. The writing has been on the wall for a very long time, but I think something went wrong somewhere. Just out of curiosity today, when I was getting ready for this conversation, I just typed in the word development. Now, Anthropocene has also been seen as Capitalocene. And this expression is very telling, which is, Carboniferous capitalism. Simon Badby and others have also used it. Looking at the pandemics, when do the pandemics end? One of course, social science explanation is when the fear of pandemic is over. The scientific explanation could be in the form of vaccinations and immunity and so on. But I think pandemics will end only when we have learned our lessons. Looking at the future, I think the hegemonic and homogenizing understanding of development, economic growth oriented, economic growth driven understanding of development, I think that needs to be critiqued. And I think this is going to be the proverbial, not even $1 billion question, but $1 trillion question in the times to come. Can we really afford, can billions in Global South, this category, Global South, develop the way in which millions in the Global North have developed? I think that is one question that critical political geographers, along with other critical social science perspectives, will have to engage in a very serious and systematic manner. Geopolitics of disease, we know some wonderful scholarship has been published, but I think the geopolitics of disease, geopolitics of pandemics, and another very interesting narrative that has come our way now is geoeconomics as a tool of geopolitics. And I think looking at all these connectivity projects, these competing connectivity projects, we would need much more engagement with the empirical reality. So my hope is that in future, as we theorize, we would also encourage more and more research through case studies. I think case study methodology, I think, is going to be very, very very, very important.
Great. Well, I think we have a wonderful amount of material and very, very thoughtful material. So I think we can wrap up the interview, unless you have anything else you feel that you forgot or needed to add, Dr. Chaturvedi.
Thank you very, very much indeed. It has been such a great delight. And all that I would say is that I think IGU, International Geographical Union, and its various commissions, including Commission on Political Geography, is doing outstanding, has already made outstanding contributions. And the list is very, very long. And as we have new empirical realities, new challenges before us, I'm very confident that IGU, the Commission on Political Geography, will attract scholars from all over the world. I think we have, as I said, very keen minds, very curious minds who want to engage and learn a lot from the scholarship that we have, the wonderful contributions that have already been made, and they are very eager. They are very eager to participate, to engage in conversation. So my hope is that IGU, Commission on Political Geography, will continue to create more and more space for participation, space for publication, for this new generation of scholars and scholarship. Because the canvas is vast, challenges are numerous, and I'm very confident that out of this crisis that we face, the new opportunities that will arise will include the opportunity to reimagine our discipline, rethink our discipline, reformulate our discipline, think more critically, ontologically, epistemologically, methodologically, and I can see a very, very bright future for our discipline or domain of knowledge production, more eclectic, more plural, political geography. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.